So internal family systems, just two things, really simply assumes that, again, within all of us, we have, they call these capabilities around curiosity, compassion, creativity, clarity, all those things I was talking about before at the prefrontal cortex, that front of our brain. And they call this self with a capital S energy. And this easy way to think about it is you at your best, right? And we all have this innate capability. And they think about this kind of like the sun, right? When you're in that space, you're in your self energy, you're kind of shining bright out to the world.
Welcome to Future Fit Leadership, a podcast for emerging, experienced and executive leaders to build community, grow capability and future focus their career pathways. There has been a global shift in how we lead, and our conversations with leaders and executives explores the skills, strategies and mindsets that is needed to thrive in this ever-evolving landscape of the future. So whether you are a seasoned executive, an aspiring leader, or simply curious about the future of leadership, we are here to give you practical insights to unlock your potential, change the status quo, and break open our assumptions on how work works. Produced in partnership with Future Leadership, a capability ecosystem for boards and executives, Future Fit Leadership is your place for bite-sized learning for executives hungry to make a change. Hello and welcome to Future Fit Leadership. I hope wherever you are listening to this podcast, you are well. Dr Michelle Quaid is an internationally recognised positive psychology expert, best-selling author and LinkedIn top 10 mental health thought leader. She has led global work across IBM and PwC, then returned to the science that asks a deceptively simple question: how do we help leaders bring out the best in people when the day is busy, the pressure is high, and the to-do list never ends? Michelle makes a powerful case that leaders are highly contagious. What lives in a leader's nervous system does not stay there. It ripples through a team's energy, focus, courage, and care. If we model clarity and calm, people think better. If we carry unprocessed stress, they carry it with us. That is not soft science. That is how brains and bodies work under pressure. We also unpack a modern leadership crisis that has quietly revealed a competitive advantage: self-compassion. Not a free pass, not a euphemism for being easy on ourselves. Michelle frames it as the inner coach that pairs kindness with accountability. The mindset that turns mistakes into learning rather than into shame and burnout. Without it, psychological safety is just theatre. With it, people speak up, take smart risks, and stay the course when the work gets hard. From there, Michelle introduces two more capabilities that change how we lead: secure attachment to self, the ability to hold our boundaries, advocate for what is needed, and have the right conversations at the right time; and self-leadership, drawing on internal family systems so the parts of us that people please, control, or shut down do not run the meeting. They learn to step back so our best judgment can step forward. We look hard at burnout, exhaustion, cynicism, and that hollow feeling that nothing we do makes a difference. We ask what boards must do to meet psychological safety duties in practice, not just on paper. And we map how leaders can stay well through a super cycle of change, including the very human questions that AI is putting on every agenda. Her latest book, The Perfectly Imperfect Little Girl, is a thought-provoking exploration of how deeply ingrained good girl conditioning influences women's confidence, decision-making, and leadership styles. Michelle's work focuses on redefining leadership for women by blending evidence-based strategies with her own lived experiences, offering tools to lead with self-compassion, authenticity, and resilience. If you care about building teams that think clearly, move wisely, and thrive through struggle, this one matters. Please enjoy my conversation with Dr. Michelle Quaid. Good morning, Michelle. Welcome to Future Fit Leadership. How are you?
I'm really well. Such a pleasure to be with you.
I'm really excited about our conversation because you've done a lot of research around the thought leadership piece and, how it all applies to leaders at work. But I want to start with yourself personally, because you're doing some research and you are an internationally recognized positive psychology expert, a best-selling author, LinkedIn top 10 mental health thought leader, and you've just written a book, and not your first one either, The Perfectly Imperfect Little Girl. Tell us a little bit about your career, maybe just some, the quick elevator pitch on your career.
Yeah, so I started in public relations. I was curious about
Really?
how did you communicate stories better into the world for workplaces in all sorts of settings. And that led me into more curiosity around marketing and branding and eventually to behavior change in workplaces because I was working for large organizations at one point like IBM and PricewaterhouseCoopers in the services area. And there your people are your brand. And so
Mm.
it really came down to behaviors as much as it did about colors and logos and ads and things like that. And as I started to work at PricewaterhouseCoopers at the time with hundreds of thousands of people in 55 countries around the world, I realized that as leaders, we often didn't understand a lot about how to change behaviors and how to do it in a way that brought out the best in our people more consistently than not. And that got me really curious as to, well, what did the science say? And around that time, the field of positive psychology, which is really just the study of human thriving, was just starting to emerge. It became the most popular course on campus at Harvard. I was living in New York at the time in a global role for PricewaterhouseCoopers. And so this was getting a lot of attention. So with their support, I went back and did my master's in positive psychology and really started to apply that science practically in your not typical audience, right? Auditors, not generally that positive.
No. Or
So
accountants.
exactly. So it was such an interesting leadership challenge around not just how could I use it in that setting, but could I help other leaders see the benefit in adding any of those tools to their toolkits? And so I did that for a number of years, and then with their blessing, went out almost 13 years ago now and started my own business where I continue to do work for them, but all sorts of organizations, all sorts of leaders all over the world, but with this focus about how do we consistently bring out the best in our people in workplace settings. And
Mm.
what got interesting to me was the more we did that work, again, all sorts of different settings, really taking the science, the evidence base, simplifying it down so it's accessible, and then making it practical. How do you do this stuff in very busy days, very dynamic environments, very diverse sets of people you're
Mm.
trying to lead? And we kept coming up against one challenge consistently that kept me like scratching my head. And that was, we get it, we want it, it all makes sense, we know we could do it, but we're just too busy to prioritize it. And I think we've all said this at some point, right?
We
About our
have.
well-being, right? I know I should be doing those things to care for my well-being. I should be using my strengths more at work. I should be having more of a growth mindset around learning. I should be investing in building more trust in my relationship. I should do all those things. And I've got this huge list of tasks and I'm just trying to get through them every day. And if I get to that, it'll be great. But they feel like the nice to haves rather than the have to
Mm.
haves. And yet, everything we see about our brains absolutely over and over again shows us these are the have to haves that make doing that long task list so much easier. And so I kept scratching the surface. What was behind? Because yes, we're all busy, but to a large extent, we choose what we prioritize to be busy with. So why were we not choosing to prioritize this? And the thing I kept coming up with for men and women in different forms was this kind of set of societal expectations many of us had grown up with around for women often being the good girl who was trying so hard to perform perfectly, to please everyone, to protect others. And then for guys, this need to be the tough guy, the more assertive, competitive, and this real crisis for both in terms of, well, I'm so busy trying to conform to all these expectations, I actually don't feel like it's safe to prioritize doing the things that more uniquely look after me rather than ticking those boxes. So that
Mm.
was what led to the work first around women, and we're just starting to expand the conversation more into men as well.
Mm. You also explored how the early conditioning of to please, to perform, and to perfect shows up in our professional lives, which is so true. How does this impact leaders across industries?
Yeah, so there definitely is a set of gender expectations that men and women get, right? So these often are societal expectations that get seeded early in our lives. And then we feel like, in order to earn love, we need to do those things successfully over and over again. So I love the research of Dr. Carol Gilligan at Harvard, who spent decades looking at this. And she has found in her longitudinal studies, particularly more Western countries tends to play out in, but we can see elements in other countries as well. But that women feel this need, often by about the age of sort of 12, 14, to earn love, to earn respect, to earn appreciation, if we think about it in our workplace setting, by performing perfectly, by trying to please everyone, keep the peace, do the emotional work for the room, and trying to protect others from pain. And so, again, if we think a lot of our female leaders, a lot of the trends we've seen around female leaders in workplaces and where we're needing support, we see these themes playing out. I mean, we see very senior leaders like Angela Merkel, when she was in the
Mm,
role of German Chancellor, talking about how she's still overprepared for every
yeah.
meeting, no matter how strong her credibility was at any point in her career. And so I just think, for most of us, when we work with women in senior leadership roles, we can probably see themes of this showing up for them. And when we interview and research with the women, they definitely report it themselves. Again, for men, same sort of thing, but a different set of expectations. And I love Dr. Niobe Wade's research in the US around guys and how this shows up. And her studies really suggesting often by the age of 10, many men have been already conditioned to have these expectations of being the tough guy or the real man. And so this is where often emotionally, the only emotions that become acceptable to express are those more dominant, assertive, competitive kind of emotions. And so while we all start, regardless of gender, with the same emotional range and capability, often early in life, these have been shaped in certain ways to earn approval, to earn respect, to earn affection. And then by the time we get to the workplace, these have become so
Ingrained.
subconscious for us, right?
Mm,
We
mm.
don't even see them playing out. And yet, I think, any of us that have sat in a leadership meeting with mixed genders there, we can probably start to pick these patterns and how they're impacting our ability to lead, to get the work done, the way that we shape our teams.
How can leaders then help? I mean, you just mentioned that, women, we bring women or men, we bring these to the workplaces. How do leadership or leadership teams actually help
Yeah, so
management move out of this?
Yeah, so I think awareness is the first thing. So we know that self-awareness around these things can be a huge way to start to set ourselves free
Mm,
individually of these expectations, right? What we have seen in our research, and certainly what Carol and Niobe and others have seen around this, is that often, by our sort of mid to late 30s, the exhaustion that comes from trying to keep up with these expectations starts to wear on all of us. And so we look at the rate of burnout that's going on in many organizations. A lot of it is around trying to perform to these expectations rather than feeling safe enough within ourselves and with each other to actually just be a bit of the imperfectly perfect human beings that we all are, and that nature wired us to be so that we could learn and grow and evolve. So some awareness is definitely a first step. What helps with that awareness is some common language. So it's actually still pretty rare, even with all the diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts that have gone on over the last decade, that we're having this part of the conversation. When we
mm.
talk about gender equity, we're kind of talking forward around, well, yes, things should be equal, but we're not necessarily kind of coming underneath the surface of, well, what causes them not to be from an emotional and social safety side versus just all the other practices. I think often we're putting band-aids on things that need stitches. Awareness number one, conversation number two, and then starting to build the skills. So we found very clearly in our research that there are three skills in particular that are not gender specific. They are deeply rooted in decades now of human thriving research, that if we can build those skills for ourselves and each other, again, it helps break free of these gender expectations that are often keeping us stuck and undermining our well-being and performance in the process.
Can you share what those three skills are?
Yeah, so again, we saw this through our research with women and men that we've done all over the world. But amazingly, again, Carol Gilligan, who has been one of the foremost researchers on the need for women's voices in research, in workplaces, in society for decades, about 2 years ago wrote a new book. And her new book was all about was going, I wish I hadn't made it about gender. I wish I'd made it about human thriving. So I think there's a really interesting piece coming through gender studies as well now to go, how do we make gender a starting place but not the finish place? So the three skills that we have found and that other researchers would support, the first is self-compassion. Right? Again, our brain is wired to attack any source of threat, including ourselves. So when going about our jobs and we feel like we're letting ourselves down, we didn't nail that presentation, we should have negotiated harder, we should have asked for something more clearly, our brain
I
tends,
do that all the time.
right? And that inner critic gets up into our faces like, you idiot, you loser, what were you thinking? Nobody will ever trust you again. And we do it because we think it keeps us safe. We think it keeps us accountable. We're giving ourselves that kind of metaphorical kick up the ass to get back in there and do better. But decades of studies show that in every domain, work, relationships, health, actually, when we use self criticism, when we rely on that as our primary learning and motivation measure, over time it exhausts us and it stops us reaching our goals. So the alternative, we see in the research, Dr. Kristen Neff and others talk about this self-compassion. We think self-compassion is just being that wise and kind friend, coach, mentor to ourselves. I think about the best bosses I've ever had and what would they say to me in this moment? And they would keep me accountable, but they would also acknowledge, what am I doing well right now? Where am I struggling? What am I learning from that? And how am I going to take it forward? So sometimes I find in workplaces we worry self-compassion will be soft. We'll all be letting ourselves off the hook. It'll all be, oh, don't worry about it. You're okay. But self-compassion actually is this ability to hold compassion and accountability
Mm.
for ourselves. And to me, it's just, again, remembering I'm a perfectly imperfect human being, just like everybody else. None of us have it all figured out all of the time. And what matters is how am I learning and growing from both my successes and my failures, not that I am simply defining myself by what I get right. So self-compassion's that first skill. Again, I think lots of beautiful research that we can draw on in workplaces, some of which we'll already have in play. I mentioned Kristen Neff on self-compassion, Dr. Carol Dweck's work on growth mindsets. We've seen moving through many workplaces over the last decade. So how do we have not just performance goals, but learning goals? I love her exercise around encouraging us to be a Yeti. So I'm just not there yet. I'm still learning and growing just like everybody else. And if we think of Dr. Amy Edmondson at Harvard's research on psychological safety, that's really at the heart. And having interviewed Amy a number of times myself, Amy's very clear. You cannot have psychological safety in a team and workplace without self-compassion and growth mindsets in play. So there's a little trio kind of skills there, many of which we already have in organizations, but maybe being more clear and specific and adding that self-compassion piece. It's kind of the cherry on top of that one. The second skill is around secure attachment. So the last few years, most of us have heard perhaps about secure attachment in more mainstream media around what was the relationship I had with my family or my caregivers growing up early in life. More recently, it's been around romantic relationships, but the latest form of secure attachment research, I think so fascinating for us in workplaces, is am I securely attached to myself? So, do I feel safe enough with myself to know that I will show up for me? I will advocate for me. I will set healthy boundaries where I need to for me, and I will not abandon myself. And I think, again, this is really interesting as we think more about psychosocial safety requirements in workplaces and those psychosocial safety requirements around emotional and social safety as we work together. It's really about, do I also feel safe enough in me so that if things aren't feeling emotionally and socially okay, either in my team, with my leader, in my organization, I will speak up about those things. Yeah, I will ask for help. I'll say, hey, that's not working for me. That's not okay. I need some different support. Or am I going to get stuck on that hump of politeness or fear. I think about it like a speed hump of where I'm biting my tongue. I'm not saying the thing. I'm moaning and groaning to everybody else, but I'm not having the constructive conversations that
It's
could.
interesting because quite often when we talk about psychological safety at work, we only talk about the work environment. We
Yes,
don't talk about the other side, which is the employees, how
absolutely.
they look at themselves or perceive themselves to be able to have the conversation.
Yeah. And yet we work in a system, right? So we have, I like to think of it about exactly that us layer, that's the organization responsibility, that we layer, leader and team together, how are we working? But there's a me layer, right? We know already that organizations can be doing everything right for psychological safety. A leader can be ticking all the boxes that they can. But if I inherently don't feel safe enough in myself, emotionally and socially, then all the things in the world are not going to change that if I'm not also doing the work on me. And I think this is a really important piece of the puzzle. And so the moment that we help people understand that, I like to imagine like at the base of our heads here at the back of our neck, where our brain stem is, and that's where all the information we're processing every day lands in that brain stem first. And I like to imagine like a safety dial there at the back of it going, am I safe enough? Am I not safe enough? Safe enough, not safe enough, as all that information comes in, because that's our brain's number one job, is to keep us safe enough to stay alive. And of course, when that safety dial says, you're safe enough, Michelle, then all the blood and the oxygen keeps flowing up to the prefrontal cortex at the front of the forehead there, where we do all our executive functioning, the best thinking. We're flexible and curious and creative and collaborative and compassionate and courageous and confident, all those things we hope to be at work, right? But when that safety dial says, maybe not safe enough here, then what happens is the blood and the oxygen move out to our arms and our legs, so we can trigger those stress responses of fight, freeze, flee, fawn, or flop are the ones that have been added in recent years. And so if we think about where do we want to be more consistently at work, where do we want our people to be, we want them to be in that safe enough zone where the blood and the oxygen is at the front of the brain where we need it, not out in their arms and their legs. So a big part of this is when people are processing all that information coming in, do they have skills that can help them feel safe enough to have the hard conversations, to navigate the difficult moments, to take smart risks, and to not move into those fight, flee, freeze, fawn or flop responses that are where so much of our emotional and social risk arises at work with each other, because we got ourselves all tangled in knots. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
no, it makes complete sense. And then the third one?
Yeah, and so then our third one is around self-leadership. And here I think there's a really interesting new piece of work starting to appear in workplaces around internal family systems, which again is a body of research and practice that now is more than 30 years old. It's been used in individual therapy settings, but starting increasingly to work its way, one, into mainstream. So we might have heard this referred to as IFS in recent years if you've been picking up sort of more mainstream self-help sort of media in any way, but now just starting to work its way into organisations as well. Over the last sort of 2 years, we've seen it popping up. So internal family systems, just two things really simply assumes that, again, within all of us, we have, they call these capabilities around curiosity, compassion, creativity, clarity, all those things I was talking about before at the prefrontal cortex, that front of our brain. And they call this self with a capital S energy. And this easy way to think about it is you at your best, right? And we all have this innate capability. And they think about this kind of like the sun, right? When you're in that space, you're in your self energy, you're kind of shining bright out to the world. But we all also, as we are growing up through childhood, tend to develop these parts, they refer to them as, of our psyche. And a part comes online to help us cope with a situation that we didn't have the resources or support that we needed often at that moment in our lives, when we were up against things that we couldn't navigate. So we protected ourselves. These parts have this protective role to try to keep us safe enough so that we don't have to feel pain and distress ever again. And what happens, we can think about these parts a bit like the clouds that come over to cover that sun of self energy. Yep. So, or again, we could think about it as the blood and the oxygen's headed out to the arms and the legs. And these parts tend to show up as controllers, people pleasers, protecting others, dominating. So these parts, again, have a protective role. They're trying to keep us safe enough, but they're often stuck back in fairly early childhood ways of behaving. And I think, again, we've all sat at leadership tables where we're like, that person is behaving like a child.
Yeah.
And you're
Yeah.
absolutely right. They are, because a part of them is trying to keep them safe as best they know how. Often these parts don't realize that we are now kick-ass adults with far more
Mm.
resources. And so this internal family systems work of self-leadership helps us just figure out kind of what are those parts that get in our way? How do we help them kind of transform, to grow up and to move on, so that we don't have so many clouds coming across that sun of who we are at our best, and we can shine forth more. And so
Mm.
some really beautiful work and language that we can start using with our teams to help untangle some of that can be so helpful.
Mm. I want to move a little bit to your research, where you link what society's expectations are to exhaustion, burnout, resentment, identity loss. What are some of the early warning signs we need to watch out for from a leadership perspective in myself or in my teams when this starts to happen?
Yeah, so I think, burnout, most of us can
Relate
unfortunately have
to?
been too
Yeah.
familiar with the last few years. It's interesting, burnout, Eve, from a psychological perspective, if you were to be signed off work for burnout, actually has three elements to it. We often only see the first one easily as leaders, so it helps to be aware of the others. The first is the exhaustion. And
Mm.
so, as leaders, we might notice somebody's starting to be more exhausted, they're dropping the ball, they're less patient, right? They've just got less energy to give. And we can see that happening. The second element is cynicism. And this
Mm.
is where other people start to really annoy us, and we've got a bit more shorter fuse, less patience, shorter temper for other people's stuff going on around us. And the third is a sense of kind of helplessness, right? That nothing I do will make any difference. Why do I bother? You'll just change it all next week anyway. So that feeling like we can't make progress towards the goals that matter to us. And so, again, I think super helpful for us as leaders to be aware somebody might not just be showing exhaustion. We can see this, they're kind of fed up with everybody around them, and they're feeling like nothing they really do is making any difference. They can't make progress towards goals. So these are definitely some of those elements. The resentment part kind of plays into that cynicism. One of the things that we saw in our research is certainly as we get through those sort of mid 30s to late 40s years in our lives, we start to become more resentful about the toll of all of this conforming to try to keep everybody else happy and respecting and valuing us. We start to feel like, when is it my turn? When are you going to see me for me, value me for me? Why can't I be perfectly imperfect and that be enough for you, knowing that I'm doing the best I can with what I have? So again, that resentment, and I think that's where we see often in burnout, that cynicism piece really starting to come up. And then that other one is the loss of identity that you touched on as well. And again, kind of makes sense. If by the time we're in our mid 30s to late 40s, we feel like we've conformed and been who everybody else needs us to be, but we don't feel like we're seen for who we uniquely are or valued or respected for that, we start to lose our sense of self. And that loss of self often leads to that feeling of helplessness about, what is this all for? Why am I bothering? Is this the life I wanted for myself? The good news is often around sort of 50 and over, certainly for women, a little for men as well, but for women, and maybe partly again with menopause changes and things like that in play, they start to care a whole lot less about conforming.
I can confirm that for you. I am
Me
well past
too.
my 50s, and I quite often, I don't give a
Yeah.
shit. It's actually just don't care
I think
anymore.
workplaces are missing the tip that women 50 and over are awesome leaders, because
Yes.
we can do all the caring, we've been through that, but we don't really give a shit
No,
anymore. I
no,
think
no.
we're missing some very untapped talent potential here biologically, in my point of view. And so for women, definitely as they get over 50, they actually care less, and they start to recover and do much better, because they're like, you know what? Now it's more on my terms and for my benefit, not just everybody else. They're still looking for the win-win. They want it to be good for you and good for them. But what they won't do consistently anymore is always make it at their cost. And I think this is such an interesting dynamic for us as leaders, because when people are always conforming to what we need as leaders in the workplace, in the short term, that can help us feel safe enough. It's like, right, you're doing what I want you to do and you're getting the stuff done. That's all I need. But what we don't always see is the long-term cost for that short-term gain. And the long-term cost is this risk of burnout and resentment and loss of identity. And so then that means, and we've all seen this in workplaces, often we're losing our best talent because they then can't go on. They're like, I have to find a different way. This is not sustainable for me. And so I think there's a real opportunity in this research for us to think about what are the kind of leaders that we want with experience to thrive in workplaces for decades, not just during these years where they're prepared to conform until they break or get fed up and have had enough of it and go, I can't survive in this corporate system. I'm out to run my own business now, which again is what we see happening with lots of female leaders.
Mm. Part of all this conversation around burnout is this, conversation about having self-compassion
Yeah.
for yourself. But it's often, I find, misunderstood for weakness in leadership. How do we reframe that as more of an authentic strategic advantage for businesses?
Yeah, I think there's two ways. One, I loved years ago interviewing Dr. Kristen Neff, who leads that self-compassion research, and she was struggling with that same thing. She's like, oh, every time I go in workplace, they hear the word self-compassion and they just think soft. And
Mm-hmm.
so she at the time and since has been talking in workplace about, think about this as your inner coach, your inner mentor, And so sometimes I think it can be a language thing. So the word self-compassion feels like nobody in your workplace is going to be able to step into that with an open mind. Full permission from Kristen and myself for what it's worth. Call it what you need,
Yeah.
number one. I think the second thing I find often though is helping leaders and teams understand neurologically what is going on in your head that would make this worthwhile. And we were talking earlier around the brain is wired to attack any source of threat, including ourselves. So when it feels like we're letting the side down, its natural instinct is to want to rise up with a lot of self-judgment, self-criticism, because it thinks it's keeping us safe. And so, how do we help educate our brain that actually, you know what, not such a great strategy? That is going to lead me to more exhaustion and burnout and self doubt and lack of confidence and procrastination because I'm worried I'm always getting it wrong. Because guess what? We're all perfectly imperfect. So, my view is if you're not getting it wrong some of the time, you're not stretching far enough outside your comfort zone to keep learning and growing. And so instead, what we need is this kind of how do we be? I often think about if people like that show, Ted Lasso. I think Ted Lasso is a great example of a leader in action embodying self compassion and therefore being able to give it to the team around him. And so, again, if we think about what happens at their best there in those moments, is there is, yes, kindness for the fact that we are all perfectly imperfect human beings who are here learning and growing. Sometimes we nail it, sometimes we fall way short, but that is the human condition. And then, secondly, to hold us accountable to, okay, that didn't work. What is yours to own in that? What is yours to learn from that? And most importantly, what are we going to do next off the other side of that? And so I think often we hear the word compassion, either for self-compassion or shared compassion, and we think soft because we miss the accountability component. But I like Dr. Brené Brown's research that consistently finds the most compassionate people are the most boundaried people as well. And it is that boundary that helps them stay out of resentment when they extend compassion.
If you could redesign leadership development for the future, what mindsets and capabilities would you embed from the start?
I would, number one, start leadership development with an understanding of the human brain and body and how it works. It still boggles my mind every day that as leaders, for most of us, our most valuable resource are our people. And yet, most of us as leaders have never had any training to understand how people work.
So true. So
And so,
true.
to me, this is just like a big glaring gap. If you gave me as a leader a really expensive piece of software or equipment, my first job would be to learn technically how does that software or equipment work so I can get the best out of it. And yet we don't with people. And so I think any leadership development program that doesn't start, and it doesn't have to be super nerdy or scientific in terms of language, but more practical in applications, just to understand a bit, again, that every person in your team, every moment of the day is navigating whatever is going on, trying to figure out, am I safe enough? Am I not safe enough? Am I safe enough? Am I not safe enough? And based on that, entirely determines how much capacity and capability they have to bring to what's in front of them, depending on where that blood and oxygen, whether their nervous system has connected to protection or connection. So that would be number one. The second thing I think is most of us as leaders don't appreciate how highly contagious we are.
I
Because we
like
are
that.
in a position of power over others, everything that we are feeling and that's going on in our brains and bodies is rippling out to our teams. And so the good news about that is actually, as leaders, if we are doing our self-work to keep our own side of the street clean and to keep working through our own learning and growth in all of this, that will ripple forth. And the bad news of it is that if we're not, often we are the number one source of most of the challenges going on in our teams. We're just not aware of what we're doing and why. And so, just to add to that, so leaders can sleep at night listening to this, it doesn't mean that we have to be perfect all the time. It doesn't mean we always have to be positive and upbeat. It just means that we need to be open and authentic and honest about our own perfectly imperfect journey that's unfolding. And in allowing space, that self compassion for us through that, that extends out for other people, that ripples as well. And then I think just the third and final one is to understand we are wired to be social creatures. And so, research on the brain shows that we feel emotional and social pain the same way we feel physical pain. So, as a leader, if I cut someone down in a meeting or even in a one on one with that person, I need to be aware that the way I do that is either the equivalent of taking them downstairs and giving them a shove as hard as I can on the pavement and their brain feeling that inside, or I can walk them down the stairs and kind of help them to the next steps of where they need to get to. And so, again, I think often as leaders, we don't understand that that emotional and social pain lights up the same part of the brain as physical pain, and therefore the consequence that we can have. So often we take sledgehammers to things that really only needed a very gentle tap to get the outcome that we wanted.
I love the way you've described all of that, particularly the contagious bit.
Yeah.
You've worked across many sectors, so from education to government to global corporates, private sector, etc. What's a common leadership challenge you are seeing across all of these sectors at the moment, particularly at a time when it's such a challenging time? I know we're probably overstating it now. It's become a real buzzword, but the old ways of leading has been thrown out, and we're kind of rewriting the book now. So, what are the common things that you are seeing that are challenges across all of these sectors?
Yeah, navigating change in ways that bring out the best in your people. And I think, look, that has been the case for me. Certainly the last 20 years of my work was really fascinated me around how, as human systems, do we navigate change. I did my PhD in that space. It interested me so much. But I think right now what we're seeing is this super cycle of change that is happening in our workplaces around changes in technology, changes in economies, changes in politics, changes in social systems, changes in the environment. And never before in human history have we concurrently had to navigate so much change all at once. And so we are in this super cycle of change. The next 7 to 10 years, we are going to stay in this super cycle of change. And that's a challenge for two reasons for leaders. Number one, even before this super cycle hit, most leaders, again, because we don't understand how the human brain and body works, don't understand how to navigate people through change. We measure psychosocial risks in workplaces all over the world. In the top three in every organisation, you will find the risk of poor change management. And so this is consistently, partly because our brains really feel unsafe with change and uncertainty. So I think there's an intensity to it. I think partly the name is misleading. We had this idea that change can always be managed, and simple changes can, but complex changes are not managed. You
Mm.
follow the energy of them one step at a time. You cannot pre-plan out. Even the best predicting programs suggest more than about 6 to 9 months with any reliability. And so we have this weird idea around change and how it works from a human system. But then you add to that this super cycle, and our nervous systems and bodies are not meant to be dealing with this much change. So we've got a lack of skill historically, And then we have this moment in time where increasingly finding ourselves, I don't think we're in the eye of the storm yet. I think we're at the edges of it. And I think as we go into 2026, we will see ourselves really starting to hit a level of change that most people's nervous systems are not built to cope with, and that we lack the skills to navigate. And so now is the time for us as leaders to be understanding for ourselves and our people, how are we going to resource through that? And this is not just about resilience. To me, this comes back to those skills we were just discussing around a different set of skills that we need to have individually and collectively to address the moment that is in front of us.
With all of that, well-being of leaders really, really is going to be critical to take businesses through all of this change, keeping the business whole and themselves whole. If you were a board today wanting to keep your leaders well through all of this, what would your advice be around how they manage this? Because otherwise it just becomes a KPI and the leader is expected to deal with it themselves.
Yeah.
And I don't think most leaders will, because they either too busy looking after other people or will just push through this.
Yeah.
So how can boards step into this world?
Yeah, I think it's a really important question for boards to be thinking about, because pre-global pandemic, generally we would have seen that leaders had higher levels of well-being than team members because they had more autonomy and freedom and power. During the global pandemic, that switched.
Shifted.
Leaders started to have lower levels of well-being, higher levels of burnout than their team members. And we thought it would go back. We thought, post-global pandemic, it'll settle back. It hasn't. It's actually gotten worse. So I think number one, as boards, we need to be conscious that leaders are under an incredible amount of pressure already. Yep, even before we come to the eye of the change storm that is ahead of us. And I think, again, we see that in the burnout numbers of leaders. We see so many leaders walking away from roles because they're like, this is just not worth it for my well-being and for the things that I want outside of work. So number one, I think leaders are in the most difficult role, and we are seeing this at the most complicated time in history. So being conscious as a board, how much more can I load onto my leaders without breaking them? I think needs to be a real question that we are asking, knowing that leaders in many cases are already at the edge of what their nervous systems and bodies can cope with. So then to the second part of your question, well, then how do we support that, right? Again, I think helping leaders have this training, the best thing we're seeing workplaces do right now around psychosocial safety, which certainly if you're in Australia is a board responsibility, for which you can be personally held accountable. If you're in a different country overseas listening to this, certainly you have codes of practice around this. Again, often what has happened around this psychosocial safety requirement is we've perhaps done a little bit of leadership training on the risk management and compliance part, and we feel we've ticked that off the list and moved on. But the best practices that we're seeing right now in organisations is putting in coaching one-on-one and at a group level for your leaders to be able to, number one, support building some of these skills we've been talking about today, but also to be providing the kind of psychosocial safety support that leaders are going to need to be able to see through this future. And so again, if we think about a psychologist, psychologists always have supervision so that there's somebody looking after them as they're doing that work of holding space for others. I don't think that should be any different with leaders, honestly. I think the two benefits from a board perspective, one for the well-being of my leaders, and so that is certainly, again, if I'm here in Australia, I can point to what have we done to try to minimise the risks on our leaders for emotional and social safety. But secondly, if your leaders aren't reasonably healthy in and of themselves, again, highly contagious, they're spreading that all through your system and creating far bigger problems on psychosocial safety that you are then probably paying out in claims or other training programs or things. Whereas if we just come to, again, where we need stitches rather than band-aids, the leaders really are the heart of that. So as boards, my encouragement would be to think about good coaching for your leaders through this work.
So, Michelle, we've come to the part of the podcast where we ask all of our guests the standard 4 questions that we have about the future of leadership. So I'll start with, if you had to describe a future fit leader in just 3 words, the kind of leader we'll need the most in the years ahead, what would those words be and why?
I'm going to go 4, but one of them's like not a real one. So I'd say thriving through, sorry, yes, sorry, yeah, thriving through struggle. I got to three. There you go. So thriving through struggle. And the reason being that when we think about well-being of leaders, it absolutely comprises moments of thriving and moments of struggle.
Mm.
Often we think about well-being means I'm only well, I'm on top of the world, everything is good. There's nothing in the research that supports that as a healthy picture of well-being. Well-being is our ability to navigate thriving and struggle and to learn from what's unfolding, to be able to ride the ebbs and the flows that are a normal and healthy part of all of our lives, knowing that we have the knowledge and the tools and the resources to do that with confidence. So again, I think thriving through struggle is going to be what leaders need to be able to do, particularly over these coming years.
Mhm. What's one future shift coming in the next few years that you think most leaders are underestimating and not prepared for?
Change.
Change.
Change is going just as artificial intelligence tools comes more into our workplaces and our societies at large, it is going to change the picture of what thriving at work looks like from anything that we know today. There's a whole lot of complexities in that workplaces are not yet discussing, and how we balance productivity and well-being when you have tools that can be on 24/7, that don't fatigue, that don't get emotionally upset with things, that can do a lot of the jobs that people love right now and gives them sense of identity and purpose and enjoyment faster, quicker, better, more reliably. Those things are going to come out of our work. And so I think there's so much complexity just in the artificial intelligent piece of change alone for human behavior. And then you add all the other changes we were talking about before in this super cycle around it. Most leaders lack the skills for emotional and social elements of navigating change. They may have the technical kind of change management piece, the project management things in play, but the emotional and social part of it is something most leaders have never been taught.
What do you wish more leaders were paying closer attention to?
Yeah, the emotional
The
and social
emotion.
part of it.
Yeah.
Again, when I talk to leaders, I say, think about where you leaked most energy in the last week. Mostly it'll be around people issues.
Mm.
And the people issues come up because we don't understand how to emotionally and socially support each other. And so, again, I think for many leaders, we could untangle a whole lot of wasted energy and effort if we just understood a little bit more about how people's brains and bodies worked.
What are the possibilities or shifts you see in the future of leadership or work that genuinely excites you and why?
So I am excited about artificial intelligence. I'm a technology nerd at heart as well. And God, a long time ago now, it was my job to introduce to the Australian media what the World Wide Web was and how anyone would make money out of it back in my PR days. They couldn't believe anyone would put a credit card into a computer. And so here we are. So I've always been fascinated around how technology tools change the way that we work and communicate and connect with each other. And absolutely, I can see artificial intelligent tools are going to do a huge amount in terms of making that better in many ways. And they are just tools, they're not intelligent beings.
Mm.
And we need to be the owners of the tools and the curators of the tools. And so, how we figure out our role and their role and do that in a way that continues to bring out the best in people, I think is definitely a fascinating challenge that all of us are going to be navigating over the coming years.
If you could embed one leadership quality into every current and future CEO, something you believe will be essential in the next decade, what would it be and why?
Compassion. Compassion with that accountability. Yep. So again, not compassion just in the we're all good, it's all soft, but compassion with accountability. And because I think so much of what we will need to navigate our way through this super cycle of change, the shifts of AI tools and how they're going to reshape our workplaces, is just massive amounts of curiosity for each other and what's bringing out the best and where are we struggling and what are we learning from that, and accountability to go with it around the, well, what do we try next? And so I think generally a lot of the divide that we see happening in the world, a lot of the fear we see going on in our workplaces comes because we don't have enough compassion. When we feel that sense of compassion in ourselves and others, that's when our brain starts to feel safe enough that even when things are super hard, you know what? I trust myself and I trust you that we'll figure this out together one way or the other.
Michelle, thank you for joining us. Now, if people want to reach out to you to bring you into their businesses or to have a conversation, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
Yeah, so if they head to michellemcquaid.com, you can just Google it or put that in or go over to LinkedIn. You'll find tons of resources. We have lots of great free toolkits around navigating change and some of these pieces that we've talked to. There's even a free survey tool. You can see how you and your team are doing around change. And if you're wanting more of the gendered work, particularly in that women's space, the goodgirlgamechangers.com has all of those female tools available as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been an absolute wonderful conversation. I could talk to you another hour, but we can't. But no, thank you for your time and thank you for joining us on Future Fit Leadership.
Thank you for having me.
If you like what you've heard, please share, rate and review this podcast. And don't forget to share it with anyone who might benefit from hearing it. The producer of Future Fit Leadership is Maritza Barone from Guide Your Light Network. If you would like to reach out to me, please DM me on any of my social media platforms. I'm available for speaking at conferences or consulting to your business. Future Fit is created in partnership with Future Leadership, a capability ecosystem for boards and executives. If you'd like to join the community and receive a free takeaway each week, sign up to the Future Exchange app in my show notes. Thank you for having me in your space.
This is a Guide Your Light Network production, creating podcasts with purpose.